Today's booktube is all about books set in and around the UK. I am British, so I thought it was about time that I did a UK list of books. I've already done India, Sri Lanka, and I've got Southeast Asia coming soon as well. Hi, I'm Steffi from Books That Teach Us. I read books and I share about the key takeaways from those books. Now, across the UK, I have tried to include from all the different countries that make up the UK, although this one is much more focused on England, and there's a couple of Scottish ones in there as well. I have tried to go across a whole range of literary genres. So I actually have classics, I've got some comedy, and I've even included a couple of plays. And I've also tried to go across different timelines. So some of them are kind of like over 100 years old, 200 years old, and some of them are amongst more modern reads. To kick it all off, we're going to start with Hamnet. Now, I have mentioned this book before on my BookTube channel. It is fantastic. It is by Maggie O'Farrell. And for those of you who don't know, Hamnet or Hamlet was the son of Anne Hathaway and William Shakespeare. And Maggie O'Farrell wrote this whole book from the point of view of Hamnet, who was actually a twin. And it's a lot about imagining what life was like back then, about grief, about families, about what it was like for Anne Hathaway to be married to Shakespeare, and that experience, it really puts her in her own role, because we only ever hear like the male side of the story and Shakespeare and what he was doing, and she had a really fascinating life and lots of the things that she believed according to this book. So it's definitely like a historical imagining of what happened at the time. It's really kind of eye-opening to the troubles of the diseases that were around at that time, and I think there's some more relatable things right now that we've all lived through the COVID pandemic, of what it's like to fear a disease, of being concerned for your family members, of quarantining, of knowing that it's in certain areas that you can't travel to. So it's actually became more relatable, the things in that time, because of COVID. So I think that was quite interesting. I wouldn't say that Shakespeare himself is necessarily painted in a great light in this book, and there's a lot of deaths in the family, so there's definitely moments of it where it's quite depressing. I think it's fantastic historical fiction. It's actually on my historical fiction huge playlist that I have. Yeah, I really recommend this to historical fiction lovers. If you love literature, I'm sure you've come across Shakespeare. And so I think that this would really suit people who want to dive into that area of history. Okay, number 2, I've gone for a bit of lightheartedness connected with Hamnet, which is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, by Gail Honeyman. Now, I really love this book. I've seen some kind of mixed reviews by people in some of the book groups that I'm in, but I just thought it's a really poignant, touching book that still manages to be quite funny, but also deals with some quite severe topics. It's about Eleanor Oliphant, who is a very quirky character. She has a lot of problems understanding social situations. People in the office where she works are quite mean to her, and she's very, very set in her routine. And she doesn't like anything to mess with it. And so she goes to work every weekend. She buys, I think, 2 bottles of vodka and gets drunk at home to kind of put herself in oblivion, and we find out later on why. So there's definitely some mention of kind of trauma and traumatic incidences, as well as comment on memories too in this book. And then she kind of befriends somebody that she comes across in the office, and it's kind of like that journey of her starting to let her guard down, start to be more open. He really helps her like understand the world around her, which she really can't make sense of. And I just think it's a lovely book. It's all set in Glasgow in Scotland, although I wouldn't say that's one of like the main pulls for the book. I kind of feel like it could be set anywhere, but it's just really light-hearted but still quite meaningful, and I think that kind of has that really nice balance for a fiction book. So I really recommend it for anyone that wants something that's going to touch you and make you feel warm inside. That's what this book did for me. Okay, number 3 is The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. For those of you who don't know, Richard Osman is quite a well-known face on British television. He's presented lots of TV shows and game shows, a show called Pointless, which was quite fun before. And I think I actually saw him once in Cambridge. And he then wrote this whole series of comedy books that are set in the UK. And they are all based in an old people's home. And basically the people who are retired and living in this old people's home decide that they're going to solve crimes. Things that the police have overlooked, they've decided the police, they're too busy, they've got all the time in the world and a lot of resources in the retirement home. So that's what they decide to do. So that's why it's called the Thursday Murder Club. They get together on a Thursday and try to solve murders. It's so lighthearted. It is like pure fluff. It actually made me laugh out loud several times. There's this whole bit about alpacas in a field and it's like a little motif that keeps coming back in. And I just thought it was hilarious. I definitely wanted to put this on the list because I thought there are so many British references in this book that a lot of people who are not British would not get. So there's lots of references to certain supermarkets like Sainsbury's and just all these little kind of British quirks that I think would go over the heads of somebody who wasn't British or hadn't spent time in the UK. They might not really get some of those. So I definitely wanted to put it on this list for being kind of quintessentially British in nature, this book. I've only read this one, but I definitely want to read some of the others in the series as well. Let me know if you have read any and if you thought they were as funny as this one. Number 4 is Kate Atkinson. I've mentioned her before on my booktube. Her novels are always fantastic. This book I've chosen is called Life After Life. And this not only is set in the UK, in London, it links in a lot with World War II and kind of evacuations and bombings and things that happened in London in that time period. But it does one of the things that I love in fiction books where it has different timelines of what could have happened during the course of the main character's life. So it's all of the different possibilities that she could have lived out depending on some of the decisions that she made, sometimes decisions that other characters have made. It's just so smart and so clever. And I really think it helps to give like a good overview of what it was like to be in London during World War II and how terrifying that must have been, with blackouts, with sirens going off for air raids. Lots of the children had to leave the city. They were all sent to live out in farms in rural areas, so a lot of children were not even with their parents. And yeah, I think Kate Atkinson is like fantastic at doing that. She's got another book as well, I can't remember if I put it on this list or not, that is all set in my hometown of Cambridge, called Case Histories, and I definitely recommend that one as well. Cambridge is a great place to set a novel, a lot of older history there, beautiful architecture, and so she really brings that to life in Case Histories as well. Book number 5, I have gone for a classic, and I have gone for Charles Dickens and Bleak House. Now I feel like this one doesn't get mentioned enough. I feel like we often hear about Tale of Two Cities, about David Copperfield, Oliver Twist, or Great Expectations. So I wanted to include one on the list that I actually really enjoyed reading. I studied this at university when I was studying literature, and it centres a lot around law and the legal system. And it does this quite clever way of kind of weaving some unexpected things from side characters kind of back into the novel, and I really enjoyed that. I would say Charles Dickens is fairly readable. Obviously, some of the language is going to be quite old. It was written in the 1800s, but I think generally it's fairly accessible for reading. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed Bleak House. Let me know if you've read it below. It's one of the less talked about Dickens books. Okay, number 6, I am bringing us back up to the current day. And this book is one of those books where like you can't put it into a genre. I thought it was fantastic. It is by an author called Emma Stonex, and it is called The Lamplighters. kind of historical fiction, kind of mystery, kind of ghost story. It's really fascinating. So it's all set on this little island off of the Cornish coast. So for those of you who don't know, Cornwall is the kind of peninsula that sticks out at the bottom of England, and it's quite far from anywhere else. Even nowadays it's quite long to get there from, say, London or my hometown Cambridge, and it's a beautiful part of the world. It's quite wild. There's huge big cliffs that drop down. It's definitely a very like atmospheric place to set a book. Now, however, this book was based on a true story, and it's set on this little island where there was a lighthouse, and the name of the book, The Lamplighters, was the name for the people who would light at the top of the lighthouse so that ships could see and try not to crash on the rocks. And this was generally a male job. They would live there. They were quite isolated from their family. You could only get to this island by boat, and only in like calmer tides and calmer seas. And this whole area is set on the Atlantic, so it's definitely like really kind of wild seas, particularly in winter. It's then based on this true story of a mystery of what happened to the men in this lighthouse. And it gives me goosebumps again, because it is like just this really creepy disappearance of some of the lamplighters and what happened to them. And it explores it all and the different possibilities. And I think this author, she does it so well. Like, it follows different characters and different lives of the men, and obviously they all had some secrets and things that weren't shared, and it's just a really unusual book. And I'd love to know if you've read it. Let me know your thoughts below on The Lamplighters, because I really can't like pinpoint it into a genre. It's such a mix, and I loved it and felt it was creepier even more because it's all based on this true story. I don't think it necessarily makes you want to go to Cornwall, but Cornwall is a beautiful area of the world. And this book might put you off because of the creepiness of it. But yeah, definitely recommend reading it. Number 7 is by Sarah Waters, and it is called Fingersmith. Now, I'm not going to lie, I read this book a really long time ago, but it really stayed with me. So I think that means it's got to be a good one, because I read a lot of books, in case you didn't know. And this is all set in Victorian England. And I actually think this is one of the first lesbian stories that I came across in a fiction book. It's, again, quite gothic. It's a lot of twists that happen in it. It's all talks about an orphan and deception that happens. There's a lot about kind of crime. So I think we really love the Victorian times, because I think there's a lot of backdrop to a lot of different stories that can be happening there. So yeah, I really recommend Fingersmith. Maybe I need to reread it as well. And it's just, yeah, really enjoyable, quite like upsetting at times about the treatment of women, for sure, in Victorian England as well. So I think I learn a lot about that, and kind of this fear that was always going on in the background, that they could just be put in an asylum and deemed crazy by kind of any man that was in their life. So I think this definitely opened my eyes to some of those things that could happen, and did happen as well. Okay, number 8. I have mentioned this book before. It is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. So this was written more recently, but all set in the 15 and 1600s, and it follows the kind of the sidekick, I suppose, a person who was working for Henry VIII, who, even if you're not British, you've probably heard of Henry VIII. He's the one that had the 6 wives over his lifetime. One of the kings that is still really remembered in history. We still learn about him in primary school, and I'm always really fascinated by the women that were there. Now, this doesn't centre the women so much. It centres a boy who grew up in a kind of very poor working class family and grew to become like one of the main advisors to Henry VIII, who is a real person. And so it's like this, again, a historical reimagining of what conversations were happening, what was going on at the time. One of my main takeaways was like, oh my God, the world then was so well connected. Like, this character, he travels all over Europe, and it was just kind of seemed quite, oh yeah, well, of course I'm gonna pop to, Flanders for this, and getting in this, and it really getting in food and wine from here and materials from this place, and it really showed me actually how well connected the world was even back then, particularly in terms of trade. And obviously that was important for countries to position themselves and not be fighting or going to war, something that was always on the cusp. It deals with one of the best queens, who is Anne Boleyn, although it doesn't paint her in as badass female light that I would want her to be, but it's definitely like an interesting take on her story and her history. This is actually the first in a whole trilogy, so it follows all the way through different queens that Henry VIII married, different little sections of history. Again, that idea of like similar to Shakespeare's time, although he was a little bit later, that constant kind of fear of the plague coming. Yeah, just really enjoyable. The only weird thing that Hilary Mantel does is that sometimes you don't know if it's a character's thought or something they've said aloud, so it can be a little confusing, but I guess she has done on purpose. So that's just a little quirk to the books, I suppose. Okay, number 9. This book, I'm not gonna lie, is definitely scary. When I read this book, I had to sleep with the light on, and I don't normally go over horror stories, but I think this is just so British that I had to. It is The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. Now, I actually studied this when I was at secondary school, so age about 15. We studied this book, and then we actually went down to London on a school trip to see the play of it, which was so scary because it's a ghost story. It is set in such a good atmospheric area of England, which is actually not that far from where I grew up, which is this area called the Fens. It's this incredibly flat area of land where there's lots of kind of swamps and boggy marshes, and of course there's lots of like creepy tales of people disappearing into the marshes, things that happened there. It's actually where I believe they proved that the world was round, because they lined up all these same posts and you could actually see the curve, because this area of land is so flat. And it's well known for a lot of kind of like narrow boats that would travel around there nowadays. There's another book on my list as well set there that's really good. Yeah, this is definitely ghostly, creepy. Daniel Radcliffe was in the film version of it, which is also quite good, and I think I felt was quite true to the novel. So yeah, if you want to be a little bit scared and experience a little bit of like the Fens in England, then you should check out this book. Okay, the next one on my list is another really quirky book, I don't actually know how you're supposed to pronounce this properly, Leviathan, which was just really quirky, a very weird book, but I enjoyed it. It's by an author called Rosie Andrews. It is all set in the UK, I think a little bit in France as well, if I remember correctly, and it is all about witch hunts and people being accused of witchcraft. And this is something we're actually going to do a whole booktube on, stories where women are accused of witchcraft, because there's a whole host of them out there. And I really strongly feel this is something that has never been properly addressed, is the amount of women that were murdered in the name of witchcraft simply for having a black cat, living alone, being unmarried, not wanting children, not being able to have children. Like, it's actually insane, and it's just one of those massive injustices that, yes, okay, we talk about the Salem witch trials, and that one's a bit more focused on like mass hysteria, and again focused on like women just being silly, and not actually on the murders, the very real murders that happened. I was in Germany a couple of years ago, and there was a big kind of plaque, one of those historical plaques on a bridge, and it said, oh, this is where they used to throw witches off of. And I actually got like quite upset with it, because I thought, this is where you murdered women. You took women and you threw them off this bridge. And for any of you that don't know, one of the tests for being a witch was if you sank, then you were innocent and you would drown, and if you floated, then you were a witch and you were burnt at the stake. Either way, you were murdered for being a woman. I just like, I don't know, I just can't get over this. Let me know if it also enrages you as much as it enrages me. Anyway, this book did nothing to ease my anger about that, but there are supernatural things that happen in this book. There's some jumping around to a few different time frames, but it's mainly set around like 1600. And it's just weird, to be honest. Like, I quite enjoyed it, but it's an odd book. I'd love to know if you've read it. It's like this thing of like, is there something supernatural or is there not? And then you think, oh yeah, there must be something supernatural, and yeah, you just kind of, the whole book, you're just like left on edge and feeling a bit confused about it. But yeah, I enjoyed it. Let me know if you've read it. Okay, number 11. I've gone for a classic. I actually studied this book at university. When I was at university, I did this whole module called, I think it was called something like North and South. I don't know. Anyway, it was about the kind of the north of England and the south of England. And I am from the south of England in Cambridge, but I studied and went to Liverpool in the north of England. So it was really about like those differences and the divide there throughout time. And this book is by a woman called Elizabeth Gaskell. It was written in the 1800s. Again, very readable book, I would say. And it is called North and South. And it is all set in Manchester, which some of you probably know from like football teams, but Manchester became a very industrialized city in the 1800s because of the Industrial Revolution. So there were suddenly big changes where people would go from kind of sewing things in their cottages to mass factories and kind of all the damage that came with that. So there was a lot of child labour. At the time, children were deemed to have smaller hands, so they could get into the machines and pull things out or fix something. So a lot of forced child labour, down mines and things as well. A lot of like breaking up of the family, a lot of expectation for everyone to be able to work. Mass migration from the countryside to the cities, which then became extremely overcrowded, like many people all living in one room. A lot of problems with poverty, with hygiene, a lot of terrible living conditions. And this book does a really good job of kind of contrasting the industrial side and the working class with this idyllic of the rural south, of living in kind of like countryside and gentility, and the realities of those two kind of contrasting things. Now obviously London is also in the south, but that was also becoming industrialized, like Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, these other cities as well. So it was, yeah, I would say I learned a lot from this book that I didn't really know about so much before. In the British school system, we do learn about the Industrial Revolution. My main thing is that the Industrial Revolution only happened on the backs of slavery, and that is never connected properly in any of these things. I might forgive Elizabeth Gaskell in the 1800s for not talking about it, but I don't really forgive the history curriculum for not talking about it. So I think that's something I always want to bring up, is that they were using cotton and making material in these factories. That was because there were enslaved people in the Americas making that cotton and picking the cotton and sending it back to the UK as part of that awful like triangle that was happening at the time. So yeah, definitely like glosses over that, which maybe you would expect for an 1800 novel, although of course there's ones that I've read that haven't. So yeah, make of that what you will. Okay, so I know I've got to mention this book, but I also have to tell you it's been a really long time, so I'm just going to give it a glossing over. I do remember reading it, so I think I remember it being like a solid book, but I think I need to reread it now that I'm an adult. I suspect I probably read it when I was about 17 or 18. It is Middlemarch by George Eliot, who is actually a woman. Many women had to write under pseudonym names then because they couldn't be published as women. So this was published in the 1800s, and it is kind of seen as one of the first books about women's roles. It's often regarded as one of the greatest English novels, which I read about, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I need to remember more of it. So anyway, yes, I will refresh Middlemarch, but just know it needs to be on this list because it was very important at the time politically too. Okay, at number 13, I have gone for Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy is one of the big name novelists and a poet, also from the 1800s, so kind of on the classics list too. I do have a whole booktube on classics that I will link at the end of this video. This one I really liked because although it's written by a man, I think he did quite a good job of showing kind of the decisions and the role of a woman. So there is a woman, her name is Bathsheba, if I'm pronouncing that right, and she basically inherits a farm and kind of is in this position of power. And then it's all about her decisions of potential suitors and men that she might marry and the options and the lifestyles that she might have as a result of that. It's Thomas Hardy, so these books are quite dense to read, and it's definitely one of the more like uplifting Thomas Hardy books. Yeah, Jude the Obscure, I don't recommend. I just remember being really depressed after reading that one. So yeah, I enjoyed this one, and it has like a more positive ending. Okay, number 14, bit of a curveball. I've gone for a play, which I wouldn't normally necessarily recommend reading a play, but I think this one is fantastic. And again, I studied it at university. It is East is East by Ayub Khan Din, who is a British playwright. This was written in more modern times. It's set in the 1970s in the UK, and it's all about a Pakistani immigrant family who live in the north of England, Salford, which is just outside of Manchester, the area that I mentioned earlier. And it's really good, it's really interesting. So it's one of those books where I read it the first time and I was so angry at the father in the family, and then we studied it, and then I suddenly had this switch, and how he is, I don't think it's an acceptable way to be and to treat your family members, but you suddenly switch and you have this empathy for him because of the complete loss of control that this Pakistani man is experiencing, because he is bringing up his children in a very different culture to his own, and how challenging that is for him as someone who was supposed to be the head of the household, and really like his spiraling lack of control of thinking, oh, I brought my kids here, to England, and I want this better life for them in England. However, he then still acts and expects them to act like they are in Pakistan, and obviously they don't, because they're at school, they're mixing with a lot of English kids, and that struggle in what must happen in a lot of immigrant families, of that balance between holding on to your culture and embracing the new culture that you're in, and that heartbreaking thing that must happen for parents to see their children actually being so utterly different to themselves because of the influence of the new culture that they're in. There's this brilliant thing that I love, I sometimes say it around the house to my sister as well, where the dad in the family says, whenever anyone offers him a cup of tea, that very British thing, he says, half cup. I have half cup. And we talked about this in university, of how the whole thing is like, yeah, he's only half embracing England. Like, he's here, but he's not fully, won't have a full cup of tea. And I thought that was really interesting. And even more ironic that obviously lots of the tea came from India and South Asia. So yeah, it's really good. It's actually really based on his own experiences of growing up in England, and I believe that the dad in the family is quite similar to his own father and how his own father was. So it's quite it's very truthful. There's a really good film of it as well, and that I think we studied as well. It was like very close to the play. Okay, number 15 is Girl, Woman, Other. I have mentioned this book before because I think it's fantastic. It is by Bernardine Evaristo, who is a British Nigerian novelist. And this book centres, I think it's 12 black women and how they interconnect their lives in England, and that lots of them are from slightly different cultures, slightly different generations, and it's just so good. There's a huge twist at the end, which I absolutely did not see coming, and it just really has so many moments into different areas. So for example, one of the women, she ends up in a squatting house in London, because like a hippie thing to do. For anyone who doesn't know, squatters are when you move into a house that is not yours and you just live there. And there are actually squatters' rights in England. I don't know if there still are. Times have probably changed, but you couldn't just be kicked out. Like if it was an empty house and you had nowhere to go, you could live in it. So I thought that was really quite interesting, and it's just very well done. It's a bit of a headache to read, to be honest, because there's no punctuation, and I'd never read a book like that before, and I definitely think it works, but it's quite like a stream of consciousness as you're reading the book. So it's definitely can be quite hard work cognitively, but the storyline is fantastic. I really recommend it. And okay, number 16. No booktube would be complete if I hadn't mentioned Elif Shafak. She is a Turkish British novelist. She wrote this book called Honor, which I don't see people kind of referencing that much. I've referenced some of her other ones before that I absolutely loved. This one is set partly in Turkey and partly in London. And again, it's quite a bit about the immigrant experience of a Turkish family who come to live in London. It's a lot about misogyny, about duty, and about the awful fallout of what happens when there is an honour killing. So I don't want to give too much away, but there's a murder that happens because someone feels that they have dishonoured the family, and so they murder this other family member. And this is something that does happen, honour killings, and so it's really quite a very serious tone and topic with it, and you're just really rooting for certain family members and trying to get your head around like, how could someone do that to their own family member just in the name of honour? And I think she does quite a good job of kind of trying to get into the mindset of someone who would do that, who thinks that is more important than the life of one of their family members. It's really quite shocking, and I really recommend it. I recommend all of Elif Shafak's books, quite frankly. Number 17 is Small Island by Andrea Levy. I absolutely love this book. I've mentioned it before. I think it's fantastic because it taught me so much, and it's a really enjoyable read, and there's a load of kind of twists and things you don't realise that are happening. So this book is set, it starts off and it's set in Jamaica, and it's about the generation of Jamaican immigrants that came to the UK. They're known as the Windrush generation. I believe that was the boat that they came on, and there's still quite a bit of talk every now and then in the news about these people because when we had a new government come in, they tried to take away the rights of the Windrush generation to be British, despite the fact that these Jamaicans were invited to the UK by the British government at the time to fill in the work. So we needed a lot more nurses, doctors, healthcare, and there were a lot of positions that we needed people for after World War II. And so yeah, some people have been treated really awfully politically as a result of this book, have been treated really awfully. This book really explores the ideas of identity, of being a Jamaican immigrant. There's all these like really, I found relatable things of like these Jamaicans from this hot tropical climate and their experience in like England where everything was just grey and like monochrome. And like where was the colour and where was the heart and where was the soul, and it's kind of definitely doesn't show England in a good light, but it is a piece of history. And so this is almost like historical fiction, I would say, because it was the experience of people who came to the UK, and this is just a really, really good read to reference that and show that, and also have these kind of big twists and really kind of big characters that you can get behind as well. Okay, so I wanted to include this one because it's actually one that I'm going to reread soon. It's by Zadie Smith and it's called White Teeth. Now, when I read this, I think again I was a teenager, and I think it was maybe too young to fully appreciate the nuances and the kind of background of White Teeth. I think I just found the book is quite a huge novel, quite overwhelming and quite chaotic, which it definitely is. But there's a lot to be said for it. So it's set mostly in London. Again, it's about immigration. It's about two families and people growing up in different cultures. It's about a merging of cultures and those kind of second or third generation kids, which is something I deal with a lot in our school because we have a lot of third generation students and people who never feel not fully English even though they grew up there, not fully Jamaican, there's a Bangladeshi character in the book. And so, yeah, I think it's just covers a lot of these really essential, fascinating topics, and I'm definitely going to read it again. I think it does that really good job of like capturing London in all its like diversity, and this spans different generations. So again, it shows the first generation of immigrants and their attitude compared with their children, who then have quite a different upbringing, and it's just, yeah, really enlightening. Okay, so I've now got 2 Ian McEwan books because I absolutely love him. He's one of my favourite authors. I think he actually writes things in the most beautiful way. So my first book I'm going to mention is The Children's Act. This was done as a film recently, and I haven't watched it yet, but the book is fantastic. So he's a modern day writer, and this book is based on a very real piece of government policy that was passed about children. And basically it starts off, the premise of the story is that there is a teenager, an older teenager, who needs a blood transfusion, and he, in order to survive, he's sick, and the doctors say that he needs to get one, and he refuses because he is a Jehovah's Witness, and they do not believe in blood transfusions. And the story centers around the High Court judge who gets to decide whether he should have this blood transfusion or not, because he is a child, so he cannot make the decision. And the doctors are saying that they have a responsibility to keep him alive, and that if he doesn't get it, he's going to die. And so it comes to her as a judge to decide the fate of this 17-year-old, and whether or not she will essentially save his life but force him to have a blood transfusion when that's against his religion or not. So I'm not going to give any spoilers away because I just think it's fantastic. It shows a lot about like the home life of the judge, a lot about this kind of very perceptive, highly intelligent 17-year-old who thinks that he should get to make up his own mind and choose his own fate, compared with this judge who's kind of, you know, weighing the life of someone in her hands. And it's one of those books where you're like, oh my gosh, I can see this from every single angle. And, you know, what is the moral thing to do? There's so much ambiguity in this book, and it's, yeah, really powerful, as you would expect from any Ian McEwan book. Another Ian McEwan book I'm going to reference is Atonement, and this is all set in a middle-class family before the Second World War, and there's a kind of misunderstanding that happens between 2 of the characters. And it kind of all spirals from there, and it follows these different characters through World War II. And definitely kind of things about different classes. Classism is kind of one of the big things that you always keep coming back to in British literature. A lot about the truth coming out. What is the truth? Our perception of how events took place. A lot about guilt, hence the name Atonement. And it's absolutely fantastic. Can't recommend it enough. Okay, number 21, I've got a young adult book, even though I still think you get quite a lot from this one as an adult. This is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, and I actually grew up watching the film version of this, and it wasn't until I was at university where I studied a section on children's literature, and we read The Secret Garden, and it's much more kind of shocking, surprising, sad than the film that I grew up watching as a child. So it all centres around Mary, and it's all set in the Yorkshire moors, and which are this kind of big rolling hills, like great for storytelling. Lots of classics were set there, like the Brontes. And it's about this little girl, Mary, whose parents are British and working in colonial India, and they die, and she is then obliged to come and live with her cousin and her uncle in this huge big house on the Yorkshire moors. And she has a very strained relationship with her cousin, and she is not really used to England. She grew up mostly in India, so she is very confused by being British. and not kind of having many friends. She's obviously grieving the loss of her parents, and she discovers a hidden door in the garden and manages to find a key to it, and it's called the Secret Garden, and it's just this beautiful, joyful moment. There's this amazing scene that they do in the film where there's all these flowers and they're kind of like bursting through when they start planting things in the secret garden, and it's just this really lovely story of kind of healing from loss, a lot about kind of building friendships. However, the ending is not how I wanted it to be, put it this way, without giving away any spoilers. Okay, so number 22, I'm going to go for a Jane Austen because I feel a bit bad. When I did my classics playlist, I didn't include any Jane Austen on it. So I'm going to give her a shout out now. This is obviously one of the classics, and when I first read some of the Bronte's books and some of Jane Austen's books, I was always a bit frustrated with Jane Austen's books because I felt like, oh, but they aren't these like big, dramatic, ridiculous characters like in the Brontes. And it's actually because I think Jane Austen, she was very much depicting life as it was. So I think it's very telling and shares a lot about how society was at the time for women, how women were trying to find their balance of having being able to have some power and decide their own fate within an ultimately very patriarchal society that they lived in, where they were carried off and expected to just have heirs and have male heirs. And yeah, I'm gonna go for Pride and Prejudice, although I've read lots and lots of different ones, and I think, you know, this is one of the ones where it's like, okay, it's a romance story, but it's so much more than that, because she rejects him, for starters. She does not like him. Both characters go away, work on themselves nowadays, probably be like, okay, they've gone to therapy for a bit, realise like their flaws, realise their love for each other. And there's just a lot more depth there as a story, and I think it is really very truthful about how society was for like the upper middle to upper class experiences for women then. Okay, number 23. I've really enjoyed this book. It is Waterland by Graham Swift. Now, I read another book by Graham Swift that was so totally different. It really threw me, and I didn't think it should have been the same author. Again, this book is set in the Fens, so there was really like flat areas, and it's all about a family that live on the Fens. There's some really dark secrets within the family. I'm not going to give any spoilers, and just very kind of about all kind of set in nature in these swamps and marshes, and about children and kind of siblings, and just, yeah, it's a really, really good read. It's quite powerful, a little bit disturbing, just as a heads up. Okay, number 24, I am going to go for another classic of Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, because it's all set in the Yorkshire moors, again, that chromatic landscape, and it's a very, very dark read. It is about this crazy, passionate love between two characters that is like forever doomed, and very volatile, violent individuals, and it represents like the outside as well, so really kind of not at all in Jane Austen's area of like, you know, like we're going to take tea in the tea room behaviour. So really scandalous. The sisters, after Emily Bronte died very young, the sisters wanted to burn this book because they thought it was so scandalous, which I always think means you got to read it. If someone thought it was so scandalous, it should never be read. So yeah, definitely recommend Wuthering Heights. Don't really recommend any of the TV or film series. There was one film I think that was okay, but yeah, read the book, it's so much better. Okay, number 25, I have gone for another Dickens books because I do think it is so British, and that's A Christmas Carol. You're probably well aware of this book because there have been so many like spin-off versions of it, even a romantic comedy called The Girlfriends of Ghosts of Girlfriends Past or something. It's such a good story. Look at how it's standing the test of time. So it follows Ebenezer Scrooge, who is this very rich, very mean, horrible man, and three ghosts visit him at night time, the ghost of Christmas past, present and future, to try and teach him what will happen if he keeps being so horrible to people around him and so tight with his money. And it's got that idea of you should donate your money, you should look after the people around you, that if you are rich, you should be held accountable for your money and you should share it with others. And it just does a really good job of, again, capturing like that Victorian England idea, what was happening then, how, you know, there was so much poverty around, how the poverty was like the rich people were expected to solve poverty rather than the government. And there's a lot of discussions I think that we could have about today, like should the rich people be helping the poor people more than the governments? Like they got more than enough. So yeah, definitely about being generous, about morality, doing what's right, and always love a bit of like Christmas ghosts too, because it's not like in a super scary way. Definitely not as bad as The Woman in Black was for me anyway. Okay, I really enjoyed this next one. I think they've just made a film of this. It is by two authors, which I think I forgot, called Mary Ann Schaffer and Annie Barrows, and it's called The Guernsey Literary and Potato Pie Society. This novel is all written in letters to each other, and it's all about Guernsey. Now, for those of you who don't know, Guernsey is a very small island off the bottom of the UK, like in between the UK and France, and it's all about World War II, what happened when the Nazis actually came and occupied Guernsey, about the people who were trying to survive at the time, and about a lot of the characters on the island who then kind of heal and move on from the past using literature to do so, and bringing them together for community. It's a really sweet, heartfelt read. All right, number 27, I've got another young learner book for you. I read this when maybe I was about 11 or 12. It's a huge, big, rollicking adventure story called Swallows and Amazon by Arthur Ransom. It was written maybe early 1900s, I think, and it follows these children as they go sailing, they go camping, imagining things, and it's just great. One of those like really wholesome children's adventure stories. It's all set in the Lake District, which is in the north of England, really beautiful area. Closest we've got like to mountains in England, and these huge big lakes that they would sail across and go and sleep for the night and tell stories. And I really enjoyed it. I think it's a lovely book. I think it's a reminder of how childhood should be, not staring at screens. Like it should be outdoors and should be in nature and should be using our imagination. Okay, number 28. I've gone for quite a curveball with this one as well. It is Brighton Rock by Graham Greene. Again, I actually studied this one at university. It's set in Brighton, which is a fantastic city in the UK, on the south coast of England. And it's a gangster mobster story about kind of violence and religion, and just quite like an enjoyable crime read, which I don't read that much crime. I don't read that much crime, so I think it was really enjoyable. We also, when I was studying it at university, we also had to watch the film version. So we read a book and watched the film each week under a genre of film noir, and it was really interesting to see how they would portray certain characters, because in Hollywood at the time they couldn't portray any criminals in a positive light. So it was like how did they get around with showing some criminal psychology to show that, you know, this is why that person might have acted like that. So I thought that was quite interesting too. All right, number 29. I've got a second play on this list. It is A Taste of Honey by Sheila Delaney. And again, it's all set in Salford, just outside of Manchester. And this was kind of very shocking at the time because it was written in 1958, and it's all about a young single mother who is a teenager. She is not married and she is pregnant. And it's kind of poverty, about trying to make do, and about a lot of social taboos. And yeah, it was really, really good studying this. I'd actually love to see it at the theatre. Maybe I need to look that up if it might be on next time I'm back in London. Okay, my final one. I'm going to leave you with a great one because I absolutely love this book and the film as well, actually. It is Salmon Fishing in the Yemen by Paul Torday. Now I know it talks about the Yemen, but also lots of it is set in England. So it's this really fun, sweet, light-hearted novel, and it's all told through like letters and memos and emails and diaries. So I really like it because it's just, he's so funny. He's got such a great sense of humor. And it's basically about a kind of older man who's a bit kind of like stuck in his marriage, and he's a scientist in fisheries, and he gets put on this ridiculous project that he thinks is ridiculous about having salmon in the Yemen, where they are absolutely not native to. And the young woman who works for a sheikh there, who wants to see this project through, has all the money in the world at her disposal, and really tries to like encourage him to come to the Yemen to figure out how they can get salmon there. And it's lovely. I really like it. It's just so funny. I think it's like the British like sarcasm in the emails as well. And then there's bits of it that are like interviews, and yeah, just, it's really good. A novel told through all different mediums. But I am actually going to do a booktube soon on novels like this, because I've read a couple of other ones very recently and that are all told through like emails or texts or things like that. So it's good fun when there's a quirky take on things like that. If you enjoyed this booktube, please like and subscribe. Leave me a comment for any other British books. I'm sure I've left a lot off. If you think there's one that you're affronted that I've left off, let me know it below, because I've already been thinking of more for a future, maybe part 2 of books set in the UK. Particularly want to aim for like more Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and maybe even do a whole Ireland one at some point too. So let me know if you've got any recommendations for that.